Hello and welcome back. Right, so we continue with our lecture on the types of behavior the Equality Act prohibits. And today we'll be looking at harassment. All right, so I'm going to share my screen now. Okay, so harassment. All right, so the concept of harassment was not, included in the original anti-discrimination legislation. Okay, so previously, for a claimant to bring a claim for harassment, they had to bring it as a form of direct discrimination, where they, had to establish that they were treated less favorably on the grounds of their sex or race. But now the law has been changed to include a section on harassment, and it is now recognized as a discrimination in its own right. Without going off course, I just want to mention that ILO, that's the International Labour Organization, has recently adopted a Convention 190 and Recommendation 206, which deals with violence and harassment at work. This is the first time that violence and harassment has been covered in international labour standards. And currently, in fact, the convention has achieved the required minimum signature, for it to come into force in June 2021. I think it has about 3 signatures now, and the minimum required is just 2 signatures. So it's going to come into force in June 2021. All right, so let's look at the provision of harassment in Equality Act 2010, and this is contained in Section 26 of the Act. All right, so Section 26(1) provides that I'm going to read it out, okay, that a person harasses another if he engages in unwanted conduct related to a relevant protected characteristic, and the conduct has the purpose or effect of violating the person's dignity or creating an intimidating, hostile, degrading, humiliating, or offensive environment. Okay, the section goes further to provide that A, so let's say A is the employer, also harasses B, the employee, if A engages in unwanted conduct of a sexual nature, and the conduct has the purpose or effect referred to the section above. Okay, so the purpose or effect is creating a humiliating environment, violating their dignity, creating a hostile environment. Okay, so that's those that I mentioned above. All right, so this is the section, or rather the subsection that deals with sexual harassment. Okay, so I'll go on to read again. So it also provides that, subsection 3, that A also harasses B if A or another person engages in unwanted conduct of a sexual nature or that is related to gender reassignment or sex. B, the conduct has the purpose or effect referred to above. And C, because of B's rejection of or submission to the conduct, A treats B less favorably than A would treat B if B had not rejected or submitted to that conduct. Okay, I'm going to break this down and explain it in more detail, but I just want to finish, reading it. All right, so subsection 4 says, in deciding whether the conduct has the effect referred to above, each of the following must be taken into account: the perception of B, the other circumstances of the case, whether it is reasonable for the conduct to have that effect. Okay, so this is the provision of Section 26 of the Equality Act 2010, which covers harassment and sexual harassment. Now, the protected characteristics covered under this section are age, disability, gender reassignment, race, religion, sex, and sexual orientation. Therefore, you cannot bring a harassment claim on the characteristics not mentioned. Say, for instance, you can bring a claim for harassment on, marriage or civil partnership. Okay, so let's look at the sections in more detail. All right, so we have the first part that talks about related to. Okay, so it says a person harasses another if he engages in an unwanted conduct related to a relevant protected characteristic. Now, using the phrase related to not only facilitates the harassment of the victim, okay, because of the protected characteristic, it also facilitates harassment where it is not the victim's characteristic that is in question. Okay, so this could be harassment that is directed at another person, okay, but it creates the prescribed consequences. All right, so therefore a person could bring a claim if the harassment of another brings about those humiliating environment, violating of dignity. Okay, then this can also cover same group harassment, where the harasser and the victim have the same protected characteristic, and the conduct is related to the protected characteristic. Okay, therefore, a man can sexually harass another man as long as the offensive conduct is related to a protected characteristic. It will be covered. Then it also mentioned their conduct. Okay, so conduct mentioned in that section, can take any form, such as, it can be oral, spoken words. It could be a display of pictures. It could be, symbols, or, dressing up, things like that. It can take any form. There was an example, given by the government in one of the guides, as the things that can amount to harassing conduct. So they said things like, male workers placing tools on high shelves, out of the reach of women. Okay, things like a woman in a male team who is always being asked to take notes or to make tea, because it's a woman's job to do so. Okay, or remarks such as, it could be her time of the month, or, oh, you look fat, or do you have a bun in the oven? Such offensive remarks, can come under, conduct. Okay. All right, so we look at the next one. All right, so the unwanted conduct, okay, again in that subsection 1. Okay, so it says the conduct has to be unwanted. All right, so the courts, must decide what is meant by unwanted. Okay, so this could range from, the victim not inviting the conduct. The victim didn't ask for the conduct, or it could be that, the action or something was spoken and the victim expressed her dislike to such a conduct. All right, so again, in the government's guidance, it was observed that a person may engage in a light joke or remarks about their sexual orientation, okay, and if their colleagues join in the same context, okay, it may not be unwanted, okay, but we know there are instances where people may join in an office joke, so that they don't feel left out, or for them to fit in, but they don't necessarily want to participate in it. All right, but just to kind of fit in within the office, they join in such jokes. There are also some instances where junior colleagues, they may find a joke offensive, but they may not complain because they don't want to be in anyone's bad books. Okay, so I mean, this is up to the court, to decide, what is unwanted, depending on the circumstances, of each case. Then we have the word again there that says purpose or effect. Okay, so it says the conduct has the purpose or effect of violating the person's dignity or creating a hostile environment, and the rest of the words that were, used there. All right, so the defendant will be liable if he acted with the purpose. Okay, so acting with purpose is acting with an intention. Okay, so the defendant will be liable if he acted with the purpose to violate the person's dignity or achieve those, prohibited results. Okay, so when you say acting with the purpose too, means that, the perpetrator sets out to humiliate the victim. Okay, that's their purpose. All right, so we know that people are like that. They say very offensive things to others just to humiliate them. And as long as it is related to a protected characteristic, then they'll be held liable. Okay, and then we don't need to prove that that which was said, actually had an effect on the victim. Okay, we don't need to prove that because the perpetrator's purpose or intention was to humiliate. All right, then he will be held liable. Okay, so the second part of it, it says purpose or effect. All right, so now this would it will cover instances where a person has said something or has done something, okay, but they did not have any intention to cause an offense. Okay, maybe they said it offhand, okay, without thinking about it, all right? But that thing that was said now has the effect of humiliating the victim or degrading the victim, okay? So that it will also be covered, okay? So it has the purpose, they set out to, or it had the effect of humiliating the victim, all right? It will be covered under that section. So this provision really, tries to stop intentional and unintentional harassment based on a protected characteristic. All right, then we look at the next one, the required effect. All right, so it says, violate dignity or create a hostile environment. All right, so the use of or there, ensures that a victim who feels that his dignity was violated can bring a claim. Okay, even though it has not created any offensive environment, but their dignity has been violated. However, this was criticized, that it can encourage frivolous claims by overly sensitive people. Again, it was also criticized that dignity is a value and not a legal rule to be protected. However, I feel I think section 26, subsection 4A and C, would address claims brought by an overly sensitive person. Okay, if we look at that, let's go back to that section to see what it says. Okay, so section 26.4, okay, it says, in deciding whether the conduct has the effect referred to, in the subsection above, each of the following must be taken into account. A says, the perception of B. Okay, so this requires that the victim must have perceived that the conduct had the required effect. All right, so this is a subjective assessment. How did the victim feel about it? Okay, were they offended? Did they think it violated their dignity? How did they perceive it? Okay, it is a subjective assessment. Okay, and then C said, whether it is reasonable for the conduct to have that effect. Okay, so that's C requires that her perception was reasonable. Thereby, it makes it an objective assessment, which it would require the tribunal to assess whether it was reasonable for the victim to take that offense. Thereby, the tribunal will be looking at what a reasonable person, would think. Okay, I'll just go back so that I don't miss. Yeah. All right. So the was the victim being overly sensitive? Okay. Would a reasonable person feel the same? Okay, so if we consider it solely, from the view of the reasonable person, right, the law will fall short of its purpose of promoting diversity, because everyone is not the same. Some people are tough and can, withstand a lot of adversity, while others are not. Okay, so I mean, we don't want everybody to be the same. Are we asking that everybody must be the same? Okay, if we say everybody must be the same, whose standards exactly are we using to judge? Okay, so if we ask the court to judge, sensitivity by the standard of the average person, it is highly unlikely that the court will account for, the diverse characteristics that they are supposed to be, protecting. Okay, so and then if we ask the judges, to judge by their own standards, it would definitely lead to inconsistencies because, they will be judging based on their own values. Okay, so this is why, the victim's perception is required, and at the same time, an objective perception or assessment is also required, to see whether the victim's perception was reasonable. Okay, is it reasonable for him or her to feel offended by whatever comment was said? All right, so yeah, so the court would be asking whether it would be reasonable for a claimant to have felt that her dignity had been violated. Okay, let's look at this case of Richmond Pharmacology against Daliwal. All right, so this was it was a case where a British woman of Indian origin, who had lived in England all her life, okay, she gave her required 1 month notice to resign from her job, and this caused her relationship with her medical director to strain. Now, during a discussion between her and the director told her, we will probably bump into each other in future unless you are married off in India, right? He didn't intend to cause offense. They actually used to have a good working relationship, all right, but he didn't intend to cause offense. But that comment invoked a stereotype of Indian women and forced their marriages. Okay, and this left the claimant very upset. And the tribunal found that it was reasonable for her to find that comment offensive. All right, so in making such an assessment, the court would have considered how an average British woman of Indian origin would have felt, if that remark was made to them. All right, maybe not all of them would have felt offended, but I think many would have if somebody judged them by on the basis of a stereotype. Okay, so if it is found that one of the average persons would have felt offended, then the claimant would not be unreasonable to have taken offense. All right, so the court judges perception based on the victim's perception as well as what an average person would have thought or would have felt. Okay, so okay, there is another part to that section 4, subsection 4, as B of it says other circumstances of the case. All right, so the court also takes the context in which the conduct occurred into consideration. A conduct may be looked at as being harmless and not offensive. All right, but when considered in the context in which it occurred, it may be considered offensive. An example could be maybe a man, invite a woman out for dinner. Obviously, something like that is not offensive, all right? But if the woman turns him down and then he persists, okay, and she turns him down several times, then that goes beyond the limits of a convention. And something like that, should be considered offensive. All right, so so the court will have regard to, all the relevant circumstances, including the context of the conduct in question. All right, so circumstances, may include, the frequency of the conduct, its severity, whether it was physically threatening or humiliating. All right, so the tribunal has to decide if the conduct was serious enough, to violate a person's dignity or create a hostile environment. Okay, so we look at the provision on sexual harassment, so which I said is provided in subsection 2A. Okay, it says that A engages in an unwanted conduct of a sexual nature. Okay, so now this removes the need for the victim to show that the conduct was related to their sex, all right, but instead that it was sexual. All right, so remember I said, when we didn't have a provision on sexual harassment, for a woman to bring a claim for sexual harassment, they had to show that the offensive conduct towards her was because of her sex. All right, so if, say, for instance, the perpetrator, was only trying to humiliate the woman, by making sexual jokes or maybe lewd comments, then it will not be because of her sex. He's just saying sexual things just to humiliate the woman. Okay, so it would be difficult for a woman to establish that something like that was because of her sex, because it wasn't. Okay, and in that case, before this, provision, the perpetrator would not be held liable. Okay, because whatever he did was not because of the woman's sex, but just to humiliate her. All right, but the way it is worded now, unwanted conduct of a sexual nature, it will cover things like sexual talk, sex jokes, offensive remarks of a sexual nature, even written or displayed pictures of a sexual nature. So all those, will now be covered. Okay, and again, the victim also has to show that the conduct was unwanted, although this may not be necessary because, when a conduct, sets out to humiliate somebody or violate the person's dignity, that such a conduct cannot, be wanted. Okay, yeah, so I have mentioned this, sometimes people, may participate in sexual jokes, not because they want to, but just to fit in, okay? Yeah, or a junior colleague, may not, want to complain or something like that, okay? Yeah, so when this happens, the defendant may claim, so assuming that somebody participates in a sexual joke, okay, and then something now brings a claim, the defendant, may argue that the conduct was not unwanted. All right, so we have a case there, Munchkin's restaurant against Kamazin. Okay, so this was, some waitresses brought a claim that their boss had subjected their boss. He was a 74-year-old man, white man. All right, so he has subjected them to years of sexual harassment. So the waitresses were migrant workers from Europe, and the boss made them wear very short skirts, and he showed them sexually explicit pictures, made comments of a sexual nature to them, and tried to engage them in sexual conversations. The defense put up an argument that the sexual conversation was not unwelcome because the claimants had accepted it or they had initiated it. All right, so that's when the ladies brought a claim. So this was the the defendant was saying, now sometimes they even initiated the talk and they had also accepted it, but the court found out that there are many situations where people will put up with an unwanted conduct, or even sometimes criminal conduct, which violates their dignity, because they are constrained by, social circumstances to do so. And then the court likened it to the case of a battered wife, who, for the sake of their children, may remain in a marriage, subjecting herself to violence from the husband. Okay, it's not like she wants the violence, but she stays and she endures it. So therefore, putting up with conduct does not really make it unwelcome. All right. So, yeah. So, I mean, like I said, some people may participate in a joke, but they don't really want to, maybe because they want to retain their jobs. And that's what happened in that case. And that's what the court, held. Okay, then we have the subsection B, which says the purpose or effect, referred above. Okay, so I have already explained this. All right, so if the conduct of a sexual nature has the purpose or effect of violating the victim's dignity, or creating a hostile environment, or humiliating them, or any of those mentioned above, then the defendant will be held liable. Okay, again, it is irrelevant that the harasser and the victim are of the same sex. Okay, then we have the subsection 3C. Okay, so that subsection protects against the quid pro quo harassment. Okay, let me just quickly read it and see what it says. 26.3c. 26.3c says, because of B's rejection of or submission to the conduct, A treats B less favorably than A would treat B if B had not rejected or submitted to the conduct. Okay. Okay, so this protects against quid pro quo harassment. When we look at theories, around these issues in another lecture, we'll look at this in more detail. But for now, just understand that quid pro quo literally means this for that. Okay, this for that. So in this context, it means exchange of sexual favors for a benefit. Okay, so section 3C, says, if because of B's rejection of or submission to the conduct, A treats her less favorably than A would treat her if she had not rejected or submitted to that conduct. Okay, so if an employer requests for sexual favors for an employment benefit, if the employee refuses to give in and they get treated less favorably than they would have been treated if they had not rejected, then they will have a claim. Okay, or they submit and they get treated less favorably than they would have been treated if they had not submitted, then they would also have a claim. All right, so this section protects a victim who rejects sexual advances from retaliation. All right, because retaliation such as maybe denying her her due pay rise or promotion. Okay, so such retaliation does not amount to sexual harassment or even sex discrimination. All right, so if we didn't have this provision and something like that happens, then she cannot be protected. Okay, but with this provision, okay, because it's actually not sexual harassment or sex discrimination, but with this, she can, bring a claim. Okay, yeah, there's also a suggestion, that women who were not approached for sexual favors, and even men, may establish a claim for hostile environment under section 26, subsection 2. Okay, if the employer, usually grants employment favors based on, them receiving sexual favors, from women, it means that the employer is passing on a message that, a message in the workplace that women are viewed as sexual playthings. Okay, so when they do something like that, then they are creating an atmosphere that is demeaning to women, and some people would find such a thing humiliating. Okay, it can create a humiliating environment for them. Okay, and that's it. Okay, so that's it for harassment and sexual harassment. Okay, where a person harasses another by engaging in an unwanted conduct related to a protected characteristic or of a sexual nature, and it has the purpose or effect of violating the person's dignity, or creating an intimidating, hostile, degrading, humiliating, or offensive environment. Okay, so yeah, that's it for sexual harassment. And I will see you next time in the next lecture. Bye.